If given power, an authoritative role, and a certain level of anonymity, will good people do bad things? The Stanford Prison Experiment was a controversial study designed to examine the psychological effects of power, focusing on the struggles between prisoners and guards in a simulated prison environment. Tonight, I'll be discussing the infamous Stanford Prison Experiment. We'll start with an overview of the experiment, move on to what transpired during its course, and conclude with its surprising end. So, what was this experiment? The Stanford Prison Experiment was conducted at Stanford University in August of 1971. It was developed by renowned psychologist and university professor Philip Zimbardo. In the 2004 documentary Quiet Rage, Zimbardo, in explaining the purpose of the experiment, said, "We wanted to see what the behavioral and psychological consequences were of becoming a prisoner or a prison guard." To recreate a realistic prison environment, Zimbardo and his team converted the basement in the school psychology building into a prison. The building's windowless lab rooms were converted into jail cells complete with steel bars. Researchers installed cameras and microphones so they could monitor the interactions between prisoners and guards at all times. A tiny, dark room at the end of a hallway was used as a solitary confinement cell. Now, to study the roles people play in a prison situation, Zimbardo needed volunteers. So he placed an ad in the local paper asking for male college students interested in participating in a 14-day study on prison life. The 75 applicants who responded were given diagnostic interviews and psychological exams just to eliminate anybody with medical issues, psychological problems, or a history of crime or drug abuse. Out of 75 applicants, 24 were selected. To ensure scientific integrity, participants were randomly assigned to the role of prisoner or guard. With roles assigned, the experiment was ready to begin. On the morning of August 14th, officers with the Palo Alto Police Department arrived at the homes of the participants selected to be prisoners. Onlooking neighbors watched in shock as they were arrested for robbery. They were handcuffed, thrown into the back of a police car, and taken to the local police station. Here, they were fingerprinted, photographed, blindfolded, and then transported to the prison. Upon arrival, they were issued a prisoner number and then forced to wear a degrading uniform consisting of a hospital gown, sandals, a hairnet, and a heavy chain attached to their ankle. In explaining this unusual prison uniform in the 2004 documentary Quiet Rage, Zimbardo said, "We realize that real male prisoners don't wear dresses, but real male prisoners do feel humiliated. Our goal was to produce a similar result very quickly." Prison guards were wearing a standard issue uniform and were also given a whistle and a heavy wooden baton. They also wore dark sunglasses, which not only made it impossible to see their eyes, it gave them a heightened level of anonymity. To help put a face to this experiment, I'd like to share two images with you. On the left is a picture of one of the prisoners in his jail cell. On the right, one of the prison's notoriously aggressive guards disciplining one of the prisoners. With guards on duty and prisoners in their jail cells, day number 1 was ready to begin. Now that we have a little background information on the experiment, let's take a closer look at what soon transpired. At first, guards and prisoners weren't 100% into their roles, but this quickly changed as they adapted to the environment. Guards weren't given any real training on how to be a prison guard, and instead had free rein, able to do whatever they deemed necessary to maintain law and order. At 2:30 in the morning on day 1, prisoners were awakened by blaring whistles, forced to line up in a hallway and recite their prisoner number over and over again in between push-ups. This went on for hours. These nightly roll calls provided regular opportunity for the guards to exert their power and control. By day 2, things began to take a turn for the worse. Much to the surprise of Zimbardo, prisoners had staged a revolt, barricading themselves inside of their jail cells. The guards, furious, burst into each cell, stripped the prisoners, removed their beds, and forced the ringleader into solitary confinement. Fire extinguishers blasting out a skin-chilling stream of carbon dioxide was used against the most disobedient prisoners. Guards were now faced with a sort of dilemma. How could they continue to maintain control? Well, prisoners were now being forced to clean the toilets with their bare hands. Verbal abuse intensified and became increasingly personal. As a result, just days into the experiment, several prisoners began exhibiting signs of emotional distress. Originally scheduled for 14 days, the experiment would come to an end after just 6. As we near the end of our discussion this evening, let's shift our focus to the experiment's surprising and abrupt end. Less than 36 hours into the experiment, the first prisoner began suffering from a serious emotional disturbance, disorganized thinking, uncontrollable crying, even fits of rage. After a full psychological evaluation, prisoner number 8612 was the first to be released. Over the next 2 days, 2 more prisoners were also released. It all came to a head on day 5 when Zimbardo's then girlfriend, Dr. Christina Maslach, came to visit. Shocked and appalled by what she saw, she implored Zimbardo and his team to end the experiment. Researchers had created an environment in which the guards were behaving sadistically and the prisoners were truly suffering. By the 5th night, it became clear the experiment must end. The next morning, on day number 6, the Stanford Prison Experiment came to its official close. Over the years, countless researchers, psychologists, and professional organizations have outlined the many ethical concerns the experiment raised. Among them, according to the American Psychological Association, was the fact that the experiment was too unpredictable. Literally anything could have happened. Furthermore, Zimbardo had become personally involved in the experiment while neglecting his professional responsibilities as a researcher and a psychologist. Despite these ethical concerns, many in the field of psychology contend the experiment yielded several important lessons. Gina Perry, in her October 13th, 2018 article for The New Scientist titled "The Evil Inside Us All," has said that while the experiment started off as a psychological exploration into prison life and prison rules, it has since been used to illuminate a wide range of behaviors, from domestic abuse to police brutality. Tonight, we learned about the Stanford Prison Experiment, a controversial study designed to examine the psychological effects of power using a simulated prison environment. We learned when the experiment was conducted and why, explored what occurred inside of the prison, and concluded with the experiment's end against a backdrop of inhumane treatment. And that brings us back to the question posed at the beginning of our discussion. Under certain circumstances, will good people do bad things? Years later, when discussing key takeaways from the experiment in a 2008 TED Talk, Zimbardo said, "The line between good and evil is permeable, and almost anyone can be induced to cross it when pressured by situational forces." Thank you for listening.